Okay, hello everyone. My name is Michael Downey, and as host of today's session, I'm very pleased to welcome you to today's AWRI webinar. Today's session will highlight the importance of biosecurity awareness while providing an overview of the essential elements involved in keeping Australia's vineyards free from exotic pests and diseases. Now, I'm fortunate to have with me the AWRI's Dr. Mardi Longbottom, who will be guiding the conversation for today's session. Now, Mardi's been active in viticultural pursuits since 1992, when she was involved in the establishment of her family's vineyards at Padthaway in the Limestone Coast. Mardi's experience includes industry positions with Vineyard Wine Group, Nepenthe, Treasury Wine Estates, the Limestone, Grapevine Wine Council, and independent grape growers. Mardi has also worked as a lecturer in viticulture at the University of Adelaide, spent 6 months in the US as a viticulture research and extension associate with Virginia Polytech Institute and State University. And she's currently employed at the AWRI as a senior viticulturist and is also president of the ASVO. It's fantastic to have Mardi here with us, but I invite you to join today's conversation. To ask a question, please open the Q&A section of the webinar, type in your question and click to send. If you would prefer to get involved through Twitter, please use the Twitter handle at @the_AWRI. The webinar is being recorded and will be available to view later this afternoon from the AWRI's YouTube channel. I'd also like to acknowledge and thank Wine Australia for providing funding and support for AWRI webinars. For those that have just joined us, the topic for today's session is biosecurity, everyone's business, and I'll hand over now to our speaker, Mardi Longbottom, to start the conversation.
Thanks, Michael, and welcome everyone this morning to today's webinar. So my name's Mardi Longbottom. I work at the AWRI as a senior viticulturist, but one of the other roles that I do as part of that job is I work as a biosecurity officer on behalf of Australian vineyards. So I guess what I'm presenting today is a bit of both of those roles that I sit with. What I thought I'd talk about, biosecurity is one of those topics where I really could be talking on this for days, but I just thought I'd pick on a couple of topical things to talk about, and then I'm happy to have some broader conversation at the end of this session. So I thought I'd just start off by just talking about why biosecurity is important, why we think it's increasing its importance as a topic. I'll give you just a couple of examples of priority exotic pests, but then more importantly, show you where to find more information about those exotic pests. Talk a little bit about how, in the event of a biosecurity incursion, we manage that. I'll give you some of our recent experiences with the Grapevine Pinot Gris virus and give you an update on the status of that. And then just lastly, some very broad recommendations around biosecurity. So starting with the why, when I'm talking about exotic pests, I'm talking about those pests and diseases that do come from outside Australia. We're incredibly fortunate as an island nation that we're protected by oceans on all of our borders. So I'm talking about those pests that are not currently in Australia, or those that we call endemic pests. While they're all important, I'm going to focus on the exotic ones. The reason why they're so important is that they're a major threat to the maintenance and longevity of wine, the wine industry's greatest assets, our vineyards. So I think it's important, when we talk about biosecurity and the increasing importance of it, we have to acknowledge that the wine industry has been through at least 10 years of extreme hardship, and that's impacted the way we manage biosecurity fairly significantly. I think on the one hand, many industry organisations and vineyards and wineries have reduced their capacity in so many ways, especially in the technical fields, that the people that we have available to manage biosecurity aren't there like they were 15 years ago. I think it's also something that it's been difficult for vineyards and wineries to invest extra money in managing biosecurity because money's been tight. And because it's really an element of risk management, it's difficult to see the impacts on the bottom line until after a biosecurity incursion's happened. I think one of the other trends that we've observed is that there's a lot more movement of both machinery and people in the industry in more recent years. With consolidation of wineries, there's a lot more fruit being transported outside of regions where they've traditionally been processed within a region. So that transport is an additional risk factor, and also the increasing use of contractors in the last 10 years. So that's not just machinery, but people themselves, contracting teams, moving from vineyard to vineyard within regions and between regions. So that's increased our risk as well. And then lastly, from a viticulture perspective, our access to agrochemicals, what we're seeing is that those chemicals that we've, I guess, traditionally been able to use to control pests and diseases in the vineyard, there's increasing pressure to take some, remove the access to those agrochemicals. So I guess if we're thinking about potential biosecurity incursions, we also have to think about the potential controls for those. And if we don't have access to agrochemicals, then we'll be more limited in our ability to control pest and disease problems. Taking a slightly different view though, I think we're all conscious that the world is becoming more flat. We do business in different ways to what we've done in the past, and that we very much operate on a global scale, and that commerce and marketing and all of those things are operating internationally. And a lot of the trade that we do is done online, and the controls that we've had in the past and had the luxury of knowing the traditional channels of purchasing and planting materials and things coming in through appropriate channels, it's become more challenging with the use of online marketing and purchasing. I think it's also people travelling internationally has become more accessible, but I think we have to be conscious too that we're having, and what we expect to happen in the next few years is having a lot more increase in tourists and visitors to vineyards and wineries. And what we know there is that especially international visitors, everyone wants to have their photo taken in an Australian vineyard. So that risk as well of visitors visiting vineyards and transporting pests and diseases around is also increasing. So what we know is that the number of biosecurity incursions relevant to the wine industry has increased significantly in the last few years, and we're expecting that may increase in the next coming years. Just a really, really quick snapshot on a couple of high priority exotic pests, and I've only pulled out these three just because they're three that probably people are more familiar with: black grapevine red blotch associated virus and Pierce's disease or Xylella. Again, I'm not thinking about giving you any details on these ones. It's just to highlight these are the types of pests that I'm talking about, those that are not currently here in Australia, and ones, but those that we do recognise they are high risk to our industry. If you do want more information, there's a couple of websites there that list the high priority exotic pests, and then over on the bottom right of your screen there's a picture of the Biosecurity Manual for Viticulture, and there's also a fair bit of information in there. So if you do visit either of those websites, there's pictures, there's fact sheets for managing these pests, and I'd encourage everyone to get familiar with those. So I wanted to also just talk about what happens in the event of a biosecurity incursion. The wine industry and all other agricultural plant industries have this thing called the EPPRD. So that's the Emergency Plant Pest Response Deed. And in essence, it's like an insurance policy. So all plant or agricultural plant crops have the ability to access this deed, and you can sign up as a signatory to this insurance policy if you like. And the wine industry, the signatories to that deed is Australian vineyards. So what happens is that if we had a biosecurity incursion, such as Xylella, came into Australia, and the appropriate thing to do is that if a grower or somebody in a vineyard spotted Xylella or symptoms of Xylella in the vineyard, what they would do is notify the government through using this 1-800 number here. That then triggers, whichever state the person's in where they notify, triggers a response at the state level. The next step is that it's escalated to the Commonwealth, and then Plant Health Australia gets involved. And then each of these parties sits around a group called the CCPP, or the Consultative Committee for Emergency Plant Pests. So depending on the pest that's involved here, if it was Xylella, Australian vineyards would get involved, representing the wine industry, and then there's any other affected parties would also join that group. So the citrus people would be there, olives would be there, and any other table grapes, drying grapes would all be there as well. So what happens at the CCPP is that all of these parties are involved in a conversation, and essentially it's the role of that group to determine the extent of the pests and how it should be managed. Something else that's really important about this is that everything that happens at these meetings is confidential, and that's to protect any individuals who may have made that first report of the problem, but it's also to make sure that any information that's being shared there is kept contained until a response has been determined. So the CCPP, so that's the Consultative Committee, it has essentially two main questions to answer. The first question that we're asked sitting around this table is this problem actually an emergency plant pest? And there's a whole set of criteria that we need to go through to determine whether it's an emergency plant pest. Now, for something like Xylella, it's well documented. We know a lot about Xylella, and it's absolutely there on the list of priority exotic pests. So we would say, yes, it's an emergency plant pest. And then the next question we need to answer is it technically feasible to eradicate? Now, this is a whole nother question. If it was, I guess, a single incursion, we might say, yes, it could potentially be technically feasible to eradicate. However, if there were 5 or 6 or 10 or 20 reports coming in at the same time, we might realise fairly quickly that it's not technically feasible to eradicate. So once we've answered those questions, if the answer is yes, it's an emergency plant pest and we believe that it's technically feasible to eradicate, it gets escalated to the Commonwealth and the states and industry, so those same parties come together to form a management plan for how they're going to deal with it. And I guess the great thing about this insurance policy, the Emergency Plant Pest Response Deed, is that the Commonwealth actually provides money and provides resources so that allows industry and the states and Commonwealth together to control or eradicate that pest. And then if, in the case that a vineyard, for example, had to be removed, then that vineyard owner may be eligible to be reimbursed for the cost of their vineyard being removed. Now, on the other hand, if the answer is no, that it's either not an emergency plant pest or it's decided that it's not feasible to eradicate it, then the scenario is a little bit different. The industry very much needs to handle this. There'll certainly be support from the Commonwealth and the states around how it gets handled, but there's no insurance policy that kicks in here, and the industry has to come up with a plan about how, same thing, and some money to control or eradicate the pest. So this is the important role of the CCPP, and it's important that people understand how that works. I thought at that point I might just share with you the experiences we've had recently with Grapevine Pinot Gris virus. Many of you will be aware that there was a detection, actually 2 detections in Australia in late 2016, and that incident of Grapevine Pinot Gris virus is still currently being considered by the CCPP group. Back in August this year, there was quite a bit of information distributed by Australian Vineyards, the AWRI, Vine Health Australia, and other state government agencies. So there's quite a bit of information out in the public domain about Grapevine Pinot Gris virus. And if you haven't seen that, you can go onto the Australian Vineyards site and have a look there. Or there's, for technical information about Pinot Gris virus, there's a fact sheet that the AWRI has put together with the help of Australian Vineyards, Vine Health Australia, and also Crop Health Services in Victoria. But the critical information, I guess, at this stage and the feedback that we've had from people who have read that information, I think the first thing that's been confusing people is the name of the virus itself. When Grapevine Pinot Gris virus was first described, it had been found in Pinot Gris, but that's not to say that it's limited to Pinot Gris. We know that it occurs in more than 28 wine and table grape varieties overseas. So it's really important to acknowledge that just because it's called Pinot Gris virus, it doesn't just affect Pinot Gris. The other really critical thing, and there was a notification just put out earlier this week, is that the time for monitoring in vineyards for Pinot Gris symptoms is right now in many regions. What we've been hearing is that probably the critical time for monitoring for these symptoms is early on. So after the shoots have reached 5 centimetres, around about 18 centimetres is where it gets more difficult to see them. Up to about 30 centimetres might be the maximum you'd be able to see the symptoms. What we know happens is that after this, the shoots seem to recover and the leaves that form after that 30 centimetre point look fairly healthy. So once you've established a reasonable canopy, it's very difficult to get in there and see these symptoms, which is why we're just recommending that if you are out in the vineyard, have a good look around early in the season. So the symptoms that you're looking for, there's a couple of pictures here, and just to make sure that you're aware that these have not come from Australia, these photos, they've come from Italy. You might be looking for stunted shoots with short internodes, and this mottling or leaf, deformed leaves that you can see there in that picture on the right. So that's the kind of thing you should be on the lookout for. And then I guess the other scenario is that if you are planning on doing new plantings or grafting, the best advice we can give at this stage is contact your nursery for advice about Pinot Gris virus. The current status of Pinot Gris virus is that we have had several reports of symptoms like Pinot Gris virus. These have been reported in Tempranillo, Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, Viognier and Cabernet Sauvignon, which is, I guess, in line with the other varieties that we know it has occurred in overseas. Those symptoms have been reported to the 1-800 number, so the state departments are aware of those reports, and those sites have also submitted samples for testing. But what I tell you right now is that the current status is that this has been unconfirmed, so there's no confirmed Pinot Gris virus in Australia at this stage. So the action from here is that if you are in the vineyard again, check vines for symptoms. If you see anything, make sure you tag the shoots and the vines and take some photos of those symptoms. And if you do see anything that looks like this, report those symptoms through the 1-800 number. So it's 1-800-084-881. And then if you want more information about it, you can subscribe to the AWRI and Australian Vineyards e-bulletins via their websites. And specifically, if you want more information about Pinot Gris virus, call Andrew Weeks, the CEO of Australian Vineyards, and the phone number's there. So I guess in general, and this is where I wanted to finish up with just some very, very general comments, stay informed and be aware of biosecurity threats. There are a lot of information sessions that are out there, things like this webinar, and we can certainly do more if people are looking for more information. But there are lots of different agencies that have these kinds of information sessions, so make sure you're aware of what's going on and attend them. There's lots of useful websites, and I'll provide you with a list at the end. Plant Health Australia nationally is incredibly useful with a lot of their information. Department of Agriculture and Water Resources also have a very large biosecurity section on their website. The AWRI has some fact sheets and other information. The state ag departments have a lot of information. They all have a biosecurity agency attached to them, and also Vine Health Australia. There's a lot of organisations that provide biosecurity support. I think nationally it's important to know that Australian Vineyards, as a signatory to the EPPRD, are extremely important. The AWRI, universities and CSIRO as RD&E providers, Wine Australia, who provide most of the significant amounts of funding for RD&E in the biosecurity space. And then at the state level, as I said before, all of the departments of agriculture have a biosecurity agency attached to them, and in South Australia we're incredibly fortunate also to have Vine Health Australia attached to the State Department. And then regionally there's numerous technical and biosecurity groups, and also include Vine Improvement there and nurseries. So I guess I'm just trying to paint a picture here that there's a lot of information out there and lots of different organisations, and it's really, we all kind of share that responsibility about managing biosecurity. In very general, and there's a lot more information on those websites, new plantings, consider using rootstocks if you need them, but mostly make sure that your material is clean and pathogen free. And then once you've got, starting with clean material, keep it clean. Make sure you've got sanitary procedures in place so that you're not moving pathogens around from vineyard to vineyard. Make sure you're out monitoring and be aware of the problems that can occur. And if you see anything unusual, make sure you report it through the Exotic Plant Pest Hotline. As I said, there's a whole stack of resources there. There's a few websites there. I think these are probably the key places to go, and there's lots of other links to other areas, but you can go back and have a look at this one later on. And then just to make the point finally that biosecurity really is everyone's business. It's all of those state departments and their associated jurisdictions, the Commonwealth, Plant Health Australia, nationally Australian Vineyards, and then all of the members that Australian Vineyards represent. So that's growers and makers of wine in Australia. And then to support all of this, there's a whole lot of other groups: Vine Improvement, Vine Health Australia, Winemakers Federation of Australia, Wine Australia, AWRI, lots of other RD&E providers, diagnostic services and nurseries. And I can say that especially in this recent case of Pinot Gris virus, we've been relying on all of these groups to come together and actually share information so that we can have an effective response. So at this point, I'm happy to take questions, or if you don't want to ask questions now, you can contact me on the number there on the screen or through the help desk or directly to my email.